It's kind of wild to think about the trust we put in people who work in healthcare, you know? I mean,
Yeah.
we're literally putting our lives in their hands.
Right.
But what happens when those hands, the ones that are supposed to be healing, start causing harm?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Today, we're going deep into the case of Orville Lynn Majors,
Oh, yeah.
a licensed practical nurse who was convicted of murdering patients.
I think I've heard of this one.
You've probably heard of him. Yeah, he's pretty infamous.
Yeah.
And while he was only convicted of killing 6 patients, investigators think the actual number could be way higher,
Really?
potentially over 100.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah, so we're going to use Major's Wikipedia article to kind of guide our deep dive today.
Sounds good.
And yeah, I think it'll be a good one.
I'm ready.
All right, so to start off, let's look back at Major's early life and career.
Okay.
He was born in Linton, Indiana in 1961.
Okay.
And what's interesting is that his path to nursing seems to have started with a genuine desire to care for others.
Hmm.
As a teenager, he spent a lot of time caring for his grandmother, who was sick.
Oh.
So you might think, well, that's a pretty compassionate start, right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
But how does that turn into becoming a suspected serial killer?
Yeah, that's a big change.
It is. It really makes you think about how complex people are.
Yeah, for sure.
So after high school, Majors actually went to nursing school and graduated in 1989.
Okay.
Then he started working at Vermillion County Hospital,
Okay.
VCH for short,
Gotcha.
in Clinton, Indiana.
Okay.
And at first, he was pretty well liked, especially by the older patients.
Interesting.
That's actually a common thing we see in a lot of cases of healthcare serial killers. They
Right.
often seem really charming and caring, which helps them gain the trust of their victim and coworkers.
Wow, that's creepy.
It is. So we have this seemingly dedicated nurse who's popular with his patients.
Yeah.
But then in 1993, Majors goes back to VCH after working somewhere else for a bit.
Okay.
And that's when things take a dark turn.
Oh, boy.
So what's really fascinating here is the huge statistical difference that popped up during Major's second time at the hospital.
Oh, really?
Yeah, before he came back, VCH averaged about 26 deaths per year,
Okay, that makes sense.
which is pretty normal.
Yeah.
But with Majors back on staff, that number jumped to over 100 deaths every year.
Well, that's almost 400% higher.
Yeah, almost 400%.
That's insane.
It's a huge red flag.
Definitely.
And it gets even crazier when you look closer at the numbers.
Okay, how so?
A patient was 42 times more likely to die when Majors was working.
42 times?
Yeah.
That can't be a coincidence.
It's like flipping a coin and getting heads 42 times in a row.
Yeah, exactly.
It's way too unlikely to just be random.
Right.
So it's not just the number of deaths that's suspicious, it's also the timing. The fact that they line up with when Majors was there.
Yeah, that's definitely a pattern.
Yeah, and when you look even deeper into what was happening around these deaths, things get even more disturbing.
Oh, no.
So what were some of the things that really stood out to investigators?
Well, one of the biggest red flags was a weird pattern they saw in some patients' deaths.
What do you mean?
So some patients died because their heartbeat went crazy after they stopped breathing.
Okay.
But that's not usually how it happens.
How is it supposed to happen?
Usually the heart stops first and then the person stops breathing. It's like the order of things was
Because
reversed.
it's like the order of events was reversed,
Right.
which is super suspicious.
Exactly. It was a small clue, but a really important one that something wasn't right.
And thankfully, Major's coworkers at VCH started to pick up on these weird patterns.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they even started making dark jokes about how the death rate went up whenever Majors was working.
Wow.
It's kind of scary how sometimes even dark humor can point to something truly terrifying.
Yeah, for sure. And those jokes probably started as a way for them to deal with the creepy atmosphere,
Right.
but they eventually led to some real action.
So who was the main person who brought this case to light?
That would be a nursing supervisor named Dawn Steerick. She decided to look into those weird coincidences, and she carefully reviewed all the time cards. And she found a shocking connection.
What was it?
Majors was present during 130 out of 147 deaths that happened at VCH.
130 out of 147.
Yep, between 1993 and 1995.
Wow, that's not just a connection, that's practically proof.
Exactly. And with Steerick's findings, the hospital called the Indiana State Police.
Oh, wow, so they got the authorities involved?
Yep, and an investigation was started.
So what happened to Majors at that point?
They suspended him from work right away while the investigation was going on.
Makes sense.
And the Indiana State Nursing Board got involved too.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they suspended his license because he was giving emergency drugs without permission and working in the ICU without a doctor's supervision.
Oh, wow, so he was doing stuff he wasn't even supposed to be doing.
Yep, and eventually VCH decided to fire him.
So it seems like justice was starting to happen, but I bet Majors didn't just give up that easily.
You're right about that. Despite all the evidence piling up, Majors kept saying he didn't do anything wrong.
Really?
He even hired a lawyer and went on talk shows telling everyone he was innocent.
That's crazy to think about, especially with such serious accusations against him.
It is. But thankfully, his attempts to control the story didn't stop the investigation.
Good.
In fact, things were about to get even more interesting.
What do you mean?
Well, while Majors was busy saying he was innocent on TV, several families of patients who died under his care came forward
Oh, no.
with their own disturbing stories.
What kind of stories?
They said they had seen Majors acting suspiciously right before their loved ones died.
Like, what kind of suspicious behavior?
Often it involved Majors giving injections right before the patients died.
Those unusual deaths with the reversed heart and breathing patterns?
Exactly. Those families started to put the pieces together.
So it wasn't just medical data, it was first-hand accounts from people closest to the victims.
Right. Those observations, plus the weird statistics, made the state police medical team take a closer look at the patient's EKGs.
EKG?
Those graphs that show the heart's electrical activity.
Okay, and what did they find?
A lot of them showed what's called widening heart patterns around the time Majors was working.
Widening heart pattern?
Yeah, basically the heart's electrical signals were getting messed up.
So he was messing with their hearts.
Pretty much. So they've got these strange EKG readings and people saying they saw Majors giving injections.
Yeah, what did the investigators do next?
To figure out these EKG problems, they brought in a specialist named Eric N. Prostowski.
Okay.
He's an electrophysiologist, which means he's an expert in heart rhythm disorders.
Got it.
And he was able to narrow down what might have caused these messed up heart patterns.
To what?
He said it could be one of three things:
Okay.
a potassium overdose, a sudden heart attack, or a big blood clot in the lung.
Okay, so 3 possibilities.
Right. But to be sure, they needed more than just EKGs. They needed to actually examine the victims.
So I'm guessing things are about to get a little grim.
Yeah, you're right. With those possible causes of death in mind and the family's stories, the authorities decided to exhume the bodies of 15 patients. Take them up.
Wow.
These were patients who had those widening heart patterns and who people had seen Majors giving injections to before they died.
That's a big step, but I guess it was necessary.
It was, and it turned out to be a major turning point in the investigation.
How so?
The autopsies show that there were no signs of heart attacks or blood clots in the lungs.
So 2 of Dr. Prostowski's possibilities were ruled out.
Exactly.
Which leaves just one really scary option, potassium overdose.
Yep, and remember those families said they saw Majors giving injections to patients right before they died.
Right, so things are starting to line up, but they still needed to connect Majors directly to the potassium chloride.
And that connection came from a surprising source.
Who?
One of Majors' old roommates.
Oh, wow.
He remembered seeing vials of potassium chloride and epinephrine at their place.
Potassium chloride and epinephrine, those are the exact things that could have caused those messed up heart rhythms.
Exactly. With this new info and a search warrant, the police searched Majors' current home. And they found tons of vials of those substances.
And I bet those vials could be traced back to VCH.
You got it.
So they have eyewitness accounts, weird medical data, and experts saying it could be a potassium overdose, and now physical evidence connecting Majors to the potential murder weapon.
It's all coming together.
Yeah, after 2 years of investigating, they finally had all the pieces.
And in December of 1997, Orville Lynn Majors was arrested and charged with 7 murders.
But they thought he killed way more than 7 people, right?
They think it could be a lot more, but the prosecutors probably decided it would be easier to focus on a smaller number of cases.
So it wouldn't overwhelm the jury.
Exactly.
That makes sense. But still, 7 murder charges, that's a lot.
It is. So what happened when Orville Lynn Majors finally went to trial?
Yeah, what happened at the trial?
Well, that trial happened in 1999, and it was a big deal.
I bet.
Can you believe they had 79 witnesses?
79 witnesses.
Yep, that's almost unheard of.
They must have had a ton of evidence to present.
They did.
Let's get into that trial and hear what those witnesses had to say about Orville Lynn Majors and what he supposedly did.
All right, let's do it.
So we left off with a Majors trial about to start.
Yeah, 79 witnesses ready to testify.
That's a lot of different perspectives on one guy.
It is.
What were some of the most memorable things people said, especially those who knew Majors worked with him or lost loved ones under his care?
Some of the most disturbing testimony came from Majors' former colleagues at VCH.
Yeah, what did they say?
They talked about disturbing things he apparently said that show he didn't care about the lives of his elderly patients.
Wow, what kind of things?
One witness even said Majors said that elderly people should be gassed.
It's hard to imagine someone in a caregiving role saying something like that.
It is.
These were the people he was supposed to be helping.
Right.
Did anyone talk about their own experiences with Majors?
Yes, several relatives of patients who died under Majors' care took the stand.
I can't imagine how difficult that must have been for them.
It must have been incredibly hard. They talked about what they saw Majors doing right before their loved ones died. Many said they had a bad feeling like something wasn't right with the care their family members were getting.
That's so sad.
It is. Can you imagine being in that situation?
No, it would be awful.
One woman whose mother died under Majors' care gave a particularly powerful testimony.
What did she say?
She described seeing Majors give her mother an injection right before her condition got really bad quickly.
Oh, wow.
She said Majors had a cold and distant look on his face,
Hmm.
almost like he didn't care about her mother at all.
That's heartbreaking.
It is. So the prosecution had those eyewitness accounts and the weird medical data, but did they have any physical evidence?
Yeah, that's a good question.
They did remember those vials of potassium chloride and epinephrine that were traced back to VCH.
Right.
Those were presented as key evidence connecting Majors to the potential murder weapon.
So it's like a real-life crime show, but way more messed up because it happened in a hospital.
Exactly a place where people should feel safe.
So the prosecution built their case with witness after witness and evidence after evidence.
Right.
What was Major's defense?
His lawyers argued that the higher death rates of VCH while Majors was there were just a coincidence. They said there was no real proof that he caused those deaths.
I see.
They also pointed out that none of the victims had potassium chloride in their bodies when they were autopsied.
That's a good point. If he used potassium chloride to kill them, wouldn't show up in their bodies.
You'd think so, but the prosecution had medical experts explain that potassium chloride breaks down really fast in the body when it's injected.
Oh, I see.
So by the time the autopsies were done, any trace of the drug could have been gone.
So it became a battle of the experts?
Yeah, a debate about whether or not this important chemical was there.
Did the jury believe Major's defense, or were they convinced by the evidence and the witnesses?
After weeks of testimony and discussions, the jury came back with a verdict.
What was it?
They found Orville Lynn Majors guilty of 6 out of the 7 murders.
6 guilty verdicts.
They couldn't all agree on the 7th one.
Why not?
Maybe because that particular victim took longer to die? So it was harder to prove that Majors was directly responsible.
Wow, 6 guilty verdicts. That's a heavy outcome.
It is. It means the jury believed he really killed those patients.
What was his sentence?
Majors got the harshest punishment possible under Indiana law at the time.
Which was?
6 60-year sentences, one after the other.
So basically a life sentence.
Pretty much, he was going to spend the rest of his life in prison.
It's hard to even grasp the seriousness of his crimes and the damage he caused to so many lives.
It is. What did the judge say about Majors when he gave him the sentence?
Yeah, what did the judge say?
The judge was Judge Ernest Yelton, and he didn't hold back when he talked about Majors' actions.
What did he say?
He called Majors' crimes diabolical acts and said it was a parallel of evil at its most wicked.
Wow.
He said that the maximum penalty was the only appropriate sentence to show how much harm Majors had caused.
Strong words from the judge.
Yeah, he really wanted to make sure Majors was held accountable.
But it wasn't just Majors who faced consequences. What happened at Vermillion County Hospital after this whole thing?
Imagine being a patient or a family member going to a hospital for help,
Right.
and then finding out that a nurse there is a convicted serial killer.
That's terrifying.
It is. It would completely destroy your trust in that hospital.
So what actually happened to VCH?
Well, they got hit with a bunch of wrongful death lawsuits from the families of patients who died under Majors' care.
That makes sense.
Most of those lawsuits were settled eventually, with families getting money from a state fund.
Okay.
But the financial burden wasn't the only consequence.
What else happened?
The hospital itself got hit with huge fines for negligence and code violations.
So the system held the hospital responsible for not stopping these tragedies?
Right. The Indiana State Department of Health did a big investigation into VCH's practices, and they found a lot of problems.
What kind of problem?
Things like not supervising staff enough, not keeping good enough records, and not properly investigating the huge increase in death rates.
So it wasn't just one person's fault, it was problems with the whole system.
Exactly.
So what happened to VCH in the end?
The consequences were serious. They lost their accreditation for a while, which meant they had to shut down temporarily.
Oh, wow.
People lost trust in them.
I bet.
Patients didn't want to go to a hospital where such horrible things had happened.
That makes sense.
It's scary to think that even big institutions can be affected so badly by the actions of one person.
It is. Did VCH ever recover?
Yeah, eventually. They were taken over by Union Hospital in Terre Haute and got renamed Union Hospital Clinton.
Okay.
Under new leadership and with a focus on patient safety and good care, they were able to rebuild their reputation.
That's good to hear, but I bet the Majors case still casts a shadow over the hospital.
It does. It's a chilling reminder of what can happen when trust is broken in such a terrible way.
Okay, but let's go back to Majors. What happened to him after he was convicted?
Yeah, after that dramatic trial and the long sentence, what happened to the man at the center of it all?
Did he ever admit what he did?
Did he show any remorse?
So Majors is found guilty, sentenced to spend the rest of his life in prison, but did he ever come clean about what he did?
Did he ever, express any remorse for the pain he caused?
That's the question that always sticks with you in these cases, right?
Yep.
What makes a seemingly normal person, someone who chose a career in caring for others, turn into someone who could do something so awful?
It's hard to understand.
And sadly, in Major's case, we don't really have those answers.
Oh, really?
He never gave us any real insight into his motivations.
So even after the trial, after being sentenced, he still insisted he was innocent.
He did. He always denied having anything to do with the deaths of his patients.
Wow.
He even tried to appeal his conviction, saying there wasn't enough proof to say he was guilty, for sure.
Huh.
But the Indiana Supreme Court upheld the original verdict in 2002?
So that was it?
Yeah, that sealed his fate. He was going to stay behind bars.
It's just strange to think about him in prison still claiming he's innocent while the families of his victims are left with this huge loss and so many unanswered questions.
It's hard to wrap your head around.
It is. So did his story end there, just a guy in prison forever saying he was wrongly accused?
Actually, there's one more twist to Major's story, and it's kind of eerie.
Oh, what happened?
In 2017, when he was 56 years old, Orville Lynn Majors died in prison.
Oh, wow. How?
From heart failure.
Wait, the guy who supposedly killed all those people by messing with their hearts died from a heart condition himself.
It's almost poetic in a really messed up way.
Yeah, it's a bizarre twist of fate.
It is. And even though his death brought some kind of legal closure to the case, it didn't really help the families heal or answer any of their questions.
I can imagine.
It shows that even with a guilty verdict, even with a life sentence, real justice can be hard to find.
Yeah.
Closure isn't always guaranteed.
Right. It's easy to get caught up in the shock and horror of these kinds of cases.
Definitely.
But we have to remember that cases like this are really rare.
Thank goodness.
Most healthcare workers are good and caring people who want to help their patients.
That's true. I think the Majors case, as disturbing as it is, can teach us something important.
What do you mean?
I think it reminds us to be aware and informed and not just blindly trust people, even in places where we expect care and compassion.
That's a good point. Have you ever been in a situation like at the doctor's office or even at work where something just felt wrong, even if you couldn't explain why?
Yeah, I think we've all had those moments where our gut feeling is telling us something's off.
Right.
But we often ignore those feelings, especially in professional settings.
Yeah, we're taught to trust people in authority, especially medical professionals.
Right.
But the Majors case shows us that our instincts can be really important.
Yeah, it's about finding that balance between trust and healthy skepticism.
Exactly. So it's not about being suspicious of every doctor or nurse.
Right.
It's about being aware, asking questions, and feeling comfortable speaking up for ourselves or our loved ones if something seems wrong.
I like that. Don't be afraid to speak up if you have concerns.
Exactly.
If you see something unusual or something that raises a red flag, report.
You could be saving lives.
It's a serious thought, but it's true. Trust your gut, ask questions, and remember you have a voice.
That's important. This case also makes you wonder about the healthcare system in general.
It does.
Like, what are they doing to prevent something like this from happening again?
What safeguards are in place?
Well, since the Majors case, there's been more emphasis on background checks for healthcare workers and stricter rules about how medications are used.
Makes sense.
And there's a push to create an environment where staff feel comfortable reporting suspicious behavior without being afraid of getting in trouble.
So it's about having multiple layers of protection.
Right, recognizing that even in a field focused on healing, there's always a chance for harm.
And it all comes back to remembering that patients are the ones who are most vulnerable.
Yes.
They deserve the best possible care and protection.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up our deep dive into this really disturbing case, I'd like to leave you with a question to think about.
Okay.
Could something like that happen in a modern hospital with all the fancy technology and electronic records they have today? Or does human evil always find a way around even the most sophisticated safeguards?
It's a scary thought, but it's important to ask these questions.
It is.
As we try to make the world a safer and more compassionate place, we have to stay aware, informed, and involved.
I agree.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the darker side of healthcare.
It was an interesting one.
We'll be back next time with another look into the complexities of our world.
Looking forward to it.
Until then, stay curious and keep asking those tough questions.